The radar contact appeared at 3:47 hours, 12 miles southwest of Nellis Air Force Base, moving at subsonic speed through restricted airspace. Controllers in the darkened tower squinted at their screens, watching the blip dance across green phosphor displays like a ghost refusing to hold still. The aircraft's transponder screamed civilian frequencies, but something felt wrong. Commercial traffic didn't fly inverted barrel rolls at 3,000 feet over classified Nevada desert, and they certainly didn't maintain radio silence when challenged 17 times in succession. Major Catherine Viper Thorne pressed her face against the cool glass of the observation deck, watching twin afterburner plumes slice through pre-dawn darkness as two F-22 Raptors scrambled from the flight line below. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't pull herself away from the unfolding drama. 23 years of military aviation had taught her to read the sky like scripture, and tonight's intruder was writing verses that made no sense. The bogey's flight pattern defied logic. It climbed to 8,000 feet, executed a perfect Immelman turn, then descended in a spiral so precise it looked choreographed. Air traffic control had exhausted their playbook, emergency frequencies, guard channels, even the old maritime distress calls. Nothing. The pilot flew like someone who knew these mountains intimately, threading between peaks with surgical precision, yet maintained complete communications blackout. Colonel James Reeves burst through the tower doors, still buttoning his flight suit. His weathered face bore the deep lines of a man who'd spent 30 years making impossible decisions in impossible circumstances. Tonight promised to add a few more. "Status report," he barked, accepting a headset from the senior controller. "Unknown aircraft, civilian transponder code 1200, no flight plan on file. We've tried everything, sir. Pilots either unconscious or hostile." The controller's voice carried an edge that spoke of long nights and short tempers. Viper stepped closer, her trained eye tracking the mysterious aircraft's movements. Something nagged at her, a pattern within chaos that felt almost familiar. The climbing sequences, the deliberate spirals, the way altitude changes came in measured intervals. Her grandfather's voice echoed from childhood summers spent in his workshop, teaching her the rhythmic language of dots and dashes that had once connected ships across vast oceans. "Colonel," she said quietly, her voice cutting through radio chatter and urgent whispers, "I think that pilot's trying to tell us something." The tower fell silent except for the steady hum of radar equipment and the distant thunder of F-22 engines climbing toward intercept altitude. Dawn broke over the Mojave Desert in shades of copper and gold, painting the mountains in warm light that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Instead, it illuminated a growing crisis that had awakened half the base and triggered protocols not used since the Cold War's darkest chapters. Major Catherine Thorne had spent her career fighting for respect in cockpits dominated by men who measured worth in G-forces and close calls. At 42, she commanded more flight hours than most squadron leaders, had survived 3 combat deployments, and could land a crippled aircraft in conditions that would ground seasoned test pilots. Yet somehow, she'd been relegated to administrative duties and training rotations, while younger officers took the glory assignments. Tonight felt different. Standing in Nellis tower, watching an impossible situation unfold, she found herself at the center of something that would either vindicate 23 years of service or end her career in spectacular failure. The mysterious aircraft continued its strange dance across restricted airspace, and with each passing minute, the pattern became clearer to her trained eye. Colonel Reeves paced behind the radar displays, his frustration evident in every sharp turn and muttered curse. The F-22s were 2 minutes from intercept, their pilots receiving authorization for escalating engagement protocols. Standard procedure demanded they establish visual contact, attempt final radio communication, then force the intruder to land or shoot it down. Raptor 11, picture clear. Target bearing 270, Angels 8, speed 200 knots. cleared to close for visual identification. The controller's voice carried across the airwaves with practiced calm that belied the tension crackling through every transmission. Viper closed her eyes, visualizing the aircraft's flight path from the past hour. Up, down, up, down, 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 up. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision, each sequence separated by straight-line flight segments lasting exactly 30 seconds. Her grandfather's workshop materialized in memory, dusty radio equipment, the smell of solder and aged leather, patient hands guiding hers across telegraph keys, while he explained how desperate messages had once crossed oceans and saved lives. "HELP," she whispered, then louder, "Colonel, the pilot's spelling help in Morse code with altitude changes." Every head in the tower turned toward her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the steady chatter of radio traffic seemed to pause, as if the entire base was holding its breath. "Say again, Major." Reeves' voice carried the carefully controlled tone of a commander processing information that could change everything. Viper moved to the plotting table, her finger tracing the intruder's course across the tactical display. Short, 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 long, long, short, long, long, short, long, short, short, pause, then repeat. HELP. The pilot's been broadcasting distress in Morse code for the past hour, using elevation changes instead of radio signals. The implications hit the room like a physical force. If the aircraft was truly in distress, if the pilot couldn't use normal communication channels, then the F-22s weren't scrambling to intercept a hostile intruder. They were racing to save someone who was desperately, silently, screaming for help in a language most of the modern military had forgotten how to read. Captain David "Smoke" Rodriguez adjusted his oxygen mask as the F-22's powerful engines carried him toward the mysterious target. 28 years old and blessed with reflexes that made him the squadron's top gun, he represented everything the Air Force valued in modern fighter pilots. Computer-sharp mind, steady hands, and absolute confidence in American technological superiority. His wingman, Captain Lisa "Phoenix" Chen, held formation 300 feet off his right wing, her Raptor's sleek profile cutting through morning air like a blade. They'd flown together for 18 months, developing the wordless communication that marked elite combat partnerships. Today's intercept should have been routine, another lost civilian pilot wandering into restricted airspace, probably running low on fuel and too embarrassed to admit navigation errors. "Raptor 11 has visual contact," Rodriguez reported, studying the aircraft ahead through his helmet-mounted display. What he saw made him pause. The target appeared to be a vintage P-51 Mustang, its polished aluminum skin reflecting sunrise in brilliant flashes. World War II fighter, restored to museum quality, flying precise maneuvers that spoke of exceptional pilot skill. "Phoenix, you seeing this?" he asked over their tactical frequency. "Copy visual. That's not your average weekend warrior Smoke. Pilot knows what they're doing." Chen's voice carried professional appreciation for the flying they were witnessing. Below them, the Mustang continued its strange pattern of climbs and dives, each movement calculated and deliberate. Rodriguez had studied enough aviation history to recognize the aircraft's significance. These machines had escorted bombers over Nazi Germany, had fought and died in skis far from home. Seeing one here now felt like encountering a ghost. "Unidentified aircraft, this is United States Air Force. You are in restricted airspace. Acknowledge this transmission and follow our aircraft to Nellis Air Force Base for immediate landing." Rodriguez transmitted on emergency frequencies, knowing his words were likely falling on deaf ears. The Mustang's response came not through radio, but through action. The vintage fighter rolled inverted, then pulled into a perfect split-S maneuver that spoke of pilot training decades old yet flawlessly executed. As it leveled out, the altitude pattern began again, short climbs, longer climbs, precise sequences that meant nothing to Rodriguez but everything to someone watching from the tower below. In Nelly's tower, Major Catherine Thorne felt her heart rate increase as she watched the F-22s close distance with their target. She knew both pilots by reputation. Rodriguez was talented but cocky. Chen was methodical and professional. Both were products of modern military aviation training, raised on digital displays and satellite communication. Neither would recognize Morse code if it tap danced across their canopy. Raptor flight, be advised your target may be communicating in Morse code using altitude changes. Pilot appears to be in distress and unable to use normal radio frequencies, she transmitted. Hopping her words would prevent a tragic misunderstanding. Rodriguez's voice crackled back, tinged with skepticism. Tower say again, Morse code, who uses Morse code? Before anyone could answer, the Mustang suddenly broke pattern. Instead of continuing its methodical climbs and dives, it rolled into a steep bank and dove toward the desert floor. Afterburner, no, propeller-driven aircraft didn't have afterburners. The big radial engine was pouring black smoke, and pieces of cowling were separating from the fuselage like metallic confetti. The vintage fighter wasn't just asking for help anymore. It was dying in the sky, and its pilot was running out of time, altitude, and options in the unforgiving mathematics of emergency aviation. The morning sun that had painted the desert in gold now illuminated what might become a funeral pyre unless someone acted fast. The Mustang's engine coughed once, twice, then fell silent. In that sudden quiet, broken only by wind rushing over aluminum and steel, the true nature of the crisis finally became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't an intruder or a hostile aircraft. This was an aviator in trouble, flying a piece of living history, trying desperately to reach safety before gravity claimed another victim. Major Catherine Thorne watched the drama unfold with the practiced eye of someone who understood that aviation disasters developed in stages, each decision point offering opportunities for salvation or catastrophe. The Mustang's engine failure transformed a puzzling intercept into a life-or-death rescue mission, but protocol still demanded that F-22 pilots maintain safe distance until the situation clarified. Raptor 11, your target appears to have suffered engine failure. Maintain visual contact, but do not close distance. Unknown pilot capabilities and aircraft condition, came the measured voice of Colonel Reeves over the radio. Rodriguez acknowledged the transmission while studying the failing aircraft ahead. The Mustang was losing altitude steadily, its propeller windmilling uselessly in the desert air. Smoke trailed from the engine compartment in an increasingly dark stream that spoke of serious mechanical failure. Yet the pilot maintained perfect control, working the aircraft through a controlled descent that spoke of exceptional skill and ice-cold professionalism under pressure. Tower, requesting permission to establish communication with emergency aircraft. Maybe we can talk them through this. Chen's voice carried the kind of calm competence that marked natural leaders. Negative, Phoenix. Continue observation and report pilot actions. Medical and crash response teams are launching from Nelly's. The Mustang's pilot seemed to hear this exchange, because the aircraft suddenly rolled into a shallow turn that aligned its nose with Nelly's runway 27. 15 miles of desert stretched between the failing fighter and safety. 15 miles that might as well have been 1,500 given the rate of altitude loss and the growing density of smoke pouring from the cowling. Viper pressed her face against the tower windows, her breath fogging the glass as she tracked the Mustang's desperate glide toward home. She'd flown enough emergency approaches to recognize the mathematical precision required for dead-stick landings. Too steep, and you'd arrive short of the runway in a fireball. Too shallow, and you'd fall out of the sky miles from help. The pilot below was threading that needle with surgical accuracy. That pilot knows these mountains, she murmured, watching the Mustang weave between peaks with margin measured in feet rather than miles. And that's museum-quality flying. Rodriguez had moved his F-22 into loose formation beside the struggling Mustang, close enough to see details through his powerful optics, but far enough to avoid debris if the vintage fighter came apart. What he saw puzzled him. The pilot wore period-correct leather helmet and goggles, but something about the figure's size and posture seemed wrong for the stereotype of World War II aviators. "Phoenix, I'm getting a weird vibe from this pilot. Can't put my finger on it." "Copy, just keep your distance and let them work. Whoever's flying that thing knows their business." The Mustang's altitude continued bleeding away, but its pilot demonstrated flying skills that belonged in textbooks. Every turn was calculated to stretch the glide, every adjustment made with the kind of precision that came from decades of experience with unforgiving aircraft. This wasn't some weekend hobbyist who'd gotten in over their head. This was someone who understood that flying vintage fighters meant accepting risk as a constant companion, someone who'd made peace with the possibility that any flight might be their last. The Morse code distress calls had been methodical and professional. The emergency approach was being flown with textbook precision despite impossible circumstances. "Whoever you are down there," Viper whispered, watching the Mustang clear another ridgeline with feet to spare, "don't give up now. You're almost home." The vintage fighter dropped below 1,000 feet, smoke now streaming in a solid black line behind the silent engine. 7 miles from Nellie's runway, still losing altitude, still perfectly controlled despite circumstances that would have killed lesser pilots. The morning sun caught the polished aluminum in brilliant flashes, turning the struggling aircraft into something almost beautiful in its desperation to reach safety. Emergency vehicles were already racing toward the runway, their red and blue lights strobing across the tarmac like earthbound stars. Medical teams, crash crews, firefighters, the entire base response apparatus mobilizing for what everyone hoped would be a successful emergency landing rather than a catastrophic crash. In the tower, Colonel Reeves made the decision that would define how history remembered this morning. "Clear runway 27 for emergency landing. All traffic hold position. This aircraft has priority." The Mustang's pilot seemed to hear this transmission despite the radio silence, because the vintage fighter's wings waggled once in acknowledgement. A tiny gesture that carried enormous meaning. The pilot was conscious, in control, and fighting for their life with every skill accumulated over what must have been decades of flying. 500 feet above the desert floor, 3 miles from salvation, the Mustang continued its impossible glide toward home. In the tower, Major Catherine Thorne felt tears she didn't know she was crying, watching someone demonstrate the kind of aviator skill that belonged in legends rather than emergency reports. The silence stretched between heartbeats, filled only with the distant thunder of emergency vehicles and the whispered prayers of everyone watching history unfold in real time. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would either be remembered as an incredible rescue or mourned as a tragic loss of both pilot and irreplaceable aircraft. The Mustang dropped to 300 feet, 2 miles from the runway threshold, when something remarkable happened. The windmilling propeller caught the morning wind just right, and the engine coughed back to life. Not full power, the smoke continued pouring from the cowling, but enough thrust to arrest the aircraft's descent rate and give its pilot precious additional seconds to work with. Captain Rodriguez watched this development with amazement. "Tower, emergency aircraft has partial power restoration. Pilots extending the approach." "Copy, Raptor 1-1. Continue observation." The Mustang's pilot used those extra moments of power like a master craftsman wielding precision tools. Short bursts of throttle to clear obstacles, then back to gliding flight to conserve whatever mechanical life remained in the failing engine. It was flying of the highest order, the kind of skill-based aviation that separated legends from statistics. Major Thorne found herself leaning forward unconsciously, as if her body could somehow help the struggling aircraft reach safety through sheer force of will. She'd flown enough approaches in damaged aircraft to understand the terrible mathematics involved. Every decision point carried life-or-death consequences. Too much power too early, and you'd burn out what engine life remained. Too little, and you'd fall short of the runway in a ball of fire. "Come on," she whispered. "You've got this, just a little further." The F-22s maintained their loose escort formation as the Mustang approached Nellie's pattern altitude. Rodriguez had switched his aircraft systems to full recording mode, ensuring that whatever happened next would be preserved for investigation and analysis. But he found himself hopping for success rather than documenting failure. "Phoenix, you ever see anything like this?" "Negative. This pilot's writing the book on impossible approaches." The Mustang lined up on final approach with the precision of someone who'd done this particular dance countless times before. 1 mile from touchdown, engine running rough but still producing power, landing gear extending with mechanical reliability that spoke well of maintenance standards. The pilot was going to make it. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of runway 27, their crews standing ready for whatever came next. Medical teams had established triage stations. Crash crews had foam trucks positioned for immediate response, but everyone watching hoped their services wouldn't be needed. Colonel Reeves keyed his microphone for what he hoped would be the final transmission of this remarkable morning. "Emergency aircraft on final approach, Nellie's runway 27. You have a clear field and priority handling. Welcome home." The Mustang's response came not through radio but through action. The vintage fighter touched down exactly on the runway centerline, its main gear kissing the pavement with the soft precision that marked exceptional pilots. The tail wheel settled a moment later, and the aircraft rolled straight down the runway centerline, as if this was just another routine training flight rather than the culmination of an impossible emergency approach. For a heartbeat, everything was perfect. Then the engine finally gave up completely, seizing with a mechanical shriek that echoed across the flight line. The Mustang coasted to a stop in a cloud of smoke and steam, its propeller frozen at an odd angle, but its pilot safe and its historical significance intact. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, but they found no fire, no structural damage, just a tired engine that had given everything it had to bring pilot and plane home safely. Through the smoke and organized chaos of the emergency response, a figure in vintage leather flying gear climbed down from the cockpit, pulled off goggles and helmet, and revealed features that made Captain Rodriguez blink in surprise. The pilot who had just executed one of the most remarkable emergency landings in Nellie's Air Force Base history was a woman whose silver hair caught the morning sun like spun platinum. In the tower, Major Catherine Thorne felt her world shift as she recognized something in the pilot's bearing that transcended gender, age, or era. This was what pure aviator skill looked like when stripped of politics and prejudice. This was flying at its highest level, demonstrated under impossible circumstances by someone who understood that wings and engines were just tools for expressing the deepest human desire to slip gravity's bonds and dance with the sky. The F-22s began their approach to Nellie's, their pilots processing what they'd witnessed. Modern fighters escorting vintage warbird, cutting-edge technology learning from skills developed in an earlier age when flying meant accepting risk as the price of touching heaven. It was a lesson in aviation that no simulator could teach and no textbook could capture. As emergency crews helped the pilot away from her aircraft, she looked up at the tower and offered a small salute. Not the crisp military gesture taught in officer candidate school, but the casual acknowledgement that passed between pilots who understood that every successful landing was a small victory against the forces that wanted to keep humans earthbound. Colonel Reeves returned the salute from the tower windows, a gesture of respect that crossed decades and recognized excellence regardless of its packaging. "Someone get that pilot to medical for evaluation, then I want a full debrief. I've got questions about that Morse code communication technique." Major Thorne watched the medical team escort the mystery pilot toward the base hospital, her mind racing with implications. If this woman had used altitude changes to spell out distress calls in Morse code, it suggested flying experience that reached back to an era when such skills were considered essential rather than obsolete. The precision of the emergency approach, the intimate knowledge of local terrain, the way she'd handled that vintage fighter, it all pointed to someone with extraordinary experience and skills that the modern military had forgotten it needed. The Mustang sat on the runway like a piece of living history, its engine silent but its aluminum skin still gleaming in the morning sun. Maintenance crews were already rolling toward it, eager to examine the aircraft and understand what had caused the mechanical failure. But Viper suspected the real mystery lay not in failed pistons or damaged cylinders, but in the pilot who had just reminded everyone watching that flying was as much art as science. Rodriguez and Chen landed their F-22s 20 minutes later, their post-flight reports filled with technical details and tactical observations that would feed investigation files and training bulletins. But both pilots carried something else as they climbed down from their cockpits: the memory of watching someone demonstrate flying skills that belonged in the same category as natural wonders and mathematical proofs. Beautiful, precise, and absolutely impossible to fake. The medical evaluation took place in a sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and fresh coffee, where base flight surgeons conducted the routine tests that followed any emergency landing: blood pressure, reflexes, cognitive function, the standard battery designed to determine if shock or adrenaline had compromised pilot judgment. The woman who had just executed the impossible sat patiently through each procedure, answering questions with the calm competence of someone accustomed to post-flight debriefings. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been Nellie's base flight surgeon for 12 years, long enough to recognize the difference between weekend pilots who'd gotten lucky and professionals who made their own luck through superior skill and preparation. The woman sitting across from her definitely belonged in the latter category. Any discomfort, shortness of breath, the smoke exposure alone could have caused respiratory issues. "I'm fine, Doc. The engine compartment seal held better than expected. Minimal cabin intrusion." The pilot's voice carried the flat professional tone that marked someone accustomed to discussing life-threatening situations as routine technical problems. Dr. Martinez made notes on her clipboard, but found herself studying her patient more than necessary. The woman appeared to be in her late 50s, with silver hair cut in a practical style that would fit comfortably under flight helmets. Her hands showed the calluses and small scars that marked someone who worked on aircraft as well as flew them. Most tellingly, she demonstrated the kind of relaxed alertness that came from decades of making split-second decisions in high-stress environments. "Your flying was remarkable today. I've been watching aviators come and go for years, and that approach will be talked about for decades." "Thank you. The Mustang's a good aircraft. Honest flying characteristics, forgiving of pilot errors. She earned her reputation the hard way." The casual way she referred to the vintage fighter suggested familiarity that went beyond weekend hobby flying. This was someone who understood P-51s at a level that came from extensive experience with their quirks, limitations, and capabilities. Major Thorne appeared in the doorway, having spent the past hour fielding questions from base command and incident investigators. She carried a flight roster clipboard and wore the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Ma'am, I hate to interrupt, but Colonel Reeves would like to speak with you when the medical evaluation concludes. We have some questions about your flight today." The pilot nodded calmly. "Of course, I imagine my paperwork's not in order." "Actually, that's part of what we're trying to figure out. There's no flight plan on file, no registration information in our databases, no record of anyone requesting permission to operate vintage military aircraft over restricted airspace." Viper's tone carried professional curiosity rather than accusation, but the implications were clear. Dr. Martinez completed her examination with the conclusion that her patient showed no signs of physical or psychological trauma from the emergency landing. Vital signs normal, cognitive function excellent, motor skills precise. If anything, the pilot appeared to be in better physical condition than many aviators half her age. You're cleared for normal duties, though I'd recommend avoiding strenuous activity for 24 hours. Standard precaution after any emergency situation. The pilot stood and shook hands with both women, her grip firm and brief. Thank you both. Now where can I find Colonel Reeves? I suspect we have quite a bit to discuss. The walk to base headquarters took them past the flight line, where maintenance crews continued their inspection of the Mustang. The vintage fighter sat surrounded by modern aircraft like a time traveler who'd stepped through a portal connecting past and present. Several young airmen stood nearby, clearly fascinated by the World War II fighter, but uncertain whether they were allowed to approach such an obviously important piece of equipment. "Ma'am," one of the airmen, a specialist whose name tape read Johnson, addressed the pilot hesitantly. "Is this really your aircraft?" "She's mine to fly, son. Been taking care of each other for quite some time now." "The engine failure, what happened?" The pilot studied the young man's face, recognizing the hunger for knowledge that marked natural aviators. "Connecting rod bearing failure, probably. She's got a lot of hours on that engine, and metal fatigue catches up with everyone eventually. The important thing is recognizing when you're in trouble and having backup plans for getting home." Johnson nodded seriously, filing away information that might prove crucial in his own flying career. Around him, other airmen listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for squadron commanders and test pilots. Major Thorne watched this interaction with growing interest. The mystery pilot spoke to the young airman with natural authority, but also with the patience of someone accustomed to teaching. Her explanations were technically precise yet accessible, delivered in the matter-of-fact tone that marked professionals who took their expertise seriously but themselves less so. "Ma'am, can I ask where you learned to fly like that?" The approach today was textbook perfect under impossible conditions. The pilot smiled for the first time since landing, an expression that transformed her entire face. "Long story, son. But the short version is that good flying comes from understanding that aircraft want to fly. Your job is to help them do what they're designed for, not fight them into submission." As they continued toward headquarters, Viper found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about the morning's events. The woman walking beside her demonstrated competence that transcended age, gender, or era. This was what mastery looked like when stripped of artificial limitations and allowed to express itself through pure skill. The questions multiplying in her mind would require answers that might challenge every assumption about modern military aviation and the pilots who claimed to represent its cutting edge. Colonel Reeves waited in Conference Room Alpha, surrounded by the kind of documentation that accumulated around unusual incidents like sediment around river stones. Flight safety reports, radar tracking data, communications transcripts, the bureaucratic aftermath of remarkable events reduced to forms and file numbers. He looked up as Major Thorne and their mystery pilot entered, his weathered face showing the strain of a morning that had produced more questions than answers. "Ma'am, please have a seat. I'm Colonel James Reeves, Base Commander. I understand we have you to thank for one of the most remarkable displays of flying any of us has witnessed." "Colonel." The pilot settled into her chair with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in military environments, "though I suspect you have questions about more than just my flying technique." "Indeed we do. Starting with the basics, name, registration information for your aircraft, and how you came to be operating vintage military hardware over restricted Nevada airspace without authorization." The pilot studied Reeves for a long moment, as if measuring something invisible but important. "My name is Colonel Amelia Ghost Hartwell, United States Air Force, retired. The P-51 is registered under Military Heritage Flight Authorization. As for restricted airspace, I had permission to be exactly where I was when the engine failed. The room fell silent. Viper felt something click into place in her mind, puzzle pieces forming a picture that seemed impossible, yet explained everything she'd observed. The call sign Ghost carried legendary status in certain aviation circles, stories told in pilot lounges about someone who'd pushed the boundaries of what was possible in both vintage and modern aircraft. Colonel Reeves consulted his files, his frown deepening as he cross-referenced information that should have been readily available. "Ma'am, I'm not finding any record of flight authorization, and the name Hartwell doesn't appear in our current systems." "That's because my clearances come from considerably higher up the chain of command than base operations. Call the Pentagon, extension 47729. Tell them Ghost needs verification for current assignment parameters." The casual way she provided a specific Pentagon extension, the complete lack of nervousness despite being questioned by a base commander, the competence displayed during her emergency landing. It all pointed toward someone operating at security levels that rarely intersected with routine base operations. Major Thorne leaned forward slightly. "Colonel, your use of Morse code altitude signals was brilliant. Where did you learn that technique?" Ghost smiled again, the expression carrying decades of memories. "My grandfather taught me Morse code when I was 8 years old. Said it was the language that connected people across impossible distances. Later, when I was flying missions where radio communication might compromise operational security, I developed ways to adapt old techniques for new situations." "What kind of missions require communication techniques that sophisticated?" Reeves asked. "The classified kind, Colonel." Before anyone could respond, a staff sergeant knocked on the conference room door. "Sir, you have a priority call from the Pentagon. They're asking for you specifically regarding a Colonel Hartwell." Reeves excused himself, leaving Viper alone with the woman who was rapidly becoming the most interesting person she'd met in 2 decades of military service. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken recognition of shared experiences and mutual respect for professional competence. 23 years active duty," Ghost said quietly, reading something in Viper's expression. "Combat tour, test pilot programs, squadron command. Yet somehow you're sitting behind a desk instead of flying operational missions." Viper felt heat rise in her cheeks. "How did you?" "The way you recognize the Morse code, the questions you ask, the way you carry yourself. You're a pilot first, administrator second. But someone along the way decided your flying skills mattered less than your gender." The brutal honesty of the statement hit like a physical blow. Viper had spent years constructing careful explanations for her career trajectory, reasons that made sense on paper, but never addressed the underlying reality of institutional bias. "I've been fighting that battle for longer than you've been alive," Ghost continued. "Different decades, same obstacles. The uniform changes, but the challenges remain remarkably consistent." Colonel Reeves returned, his expression completely transformed. Where suspicion had been, Viper now saw something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Your credentials check out at levels considerably above my clearance. I'm to provide any assistance you require and ask no further questions about your mission parameters." Ghost nodded as if this outcome had never been in doubt. "Thank you, Colonel. Now, I believe Major Thorne and I have some things to discuss. About flying, about opportunities, and about what it means to serve your country when your country doesn't always make that service easy." The rest of the afternoon passed in conversations that would change multiple careers and challenge assumptions that had gone unexamined for decades. Major Catherine Thorne found herself in the base officers club at 1800 hours, sitting across from a woman whose very existence challenged everything she'd been told about advancement, opportunity, and the price of excellence in a profession dominated by men who measured worth in narrow categories. The club was nearly empty, just a few off-duty pilots nursing beers and discussing the day's unusual events in the careful language that marked classified operations. Colonel Ghost Hartwell had changed from flight gear into a crisp dress uniform that displayed ribbons and decorations spanning decades of service. The Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, Air Medal with multiple clusters, decorations that told stories of missions flown in hostile skies, where failure meant death and success meant living to fight another day. You're wondering how I managed to stay in the game for 37 years when you're fighting for basic recognition after 23. Ghost's observation cut straight to the heart of Viper's internal struggle. Among other things, yes, ma'am. The answer isn't what you might expect. I succeeded not by fighting the system directly, but by becoming so valuable that the system couldn't afford to waste my talents on institutional politics. Ghost sipped her coffee, organizing thoughts that clearly involved classified information requiring careful editing. In 1987, I was exactly where you are now. Exceptional pilot, multiple combat decorations, watching lesser aviators advance while my career stagnated due to factors beyond my control. Viper leaned forward, recognizing the beginning of a story that might contain answers she'd been seeking for years. That's when someone approached me with an offer. Special operations, highly classified, missions that required pilots willing to fly anything anywhere under impossible conditions. The catch was giving up traditional career advancement in exchange for the chance to do what I was born to do, fly. What kind of missions? The kind that don't appear in official records. Test flights of experimental aircraft, deep reconnaissance in hostile territory, situations where failure would create international incidents and success would never be officially acknowledged. The implications were staggering. Ghost was describing a shadow career that paralleled official military structure while operating at classification levels that made routine operations look like elementary school exercises. For 37 years, I've been flying missions that push the boundaries of what's possible, not for glory or advancement, but because the work mattered and I was exceptionally good at it. The P-51 today was that part of an operation. Ghost smiled. Let's say I was evaluating the reliability of vintage aircraft for potential special applications when mechanical failure forced an unscheduled landing. The Morse code technique was developed for situations where normal communication channels might compromise mission security. Viper processed this information, understanding that she was being offered a glimpse into aviation operations that existed in parallel with everything she'd known about military flying. Why are you telling me this? Because talent recognizes talent, and watching exceptional pilots waste their careers fighting institutional biases serves no one's interests. You have skills that could be better utilized in applications where performance matters more than politics. The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on subjects that would never appear in official reports, but that explained how truly gifted aviators found ways to serve their country despite obstacles that might have ended lesser careers. Ghost spoke of aircraft that didn't officially exist, missions that never happened, and pilots who discovered that the highest levels of service sometimes required stepping outside conventional military structure. I can't make promises, Ghost concluded as they prepared to leave. But if you're interested in flying that challenges every skill you've developed, in missions that matter at levels you've never imagined, there are people who need to evaluate your qualifications. Major Thorne walked back to her quarters through desert air that carried the sound of distant jet engines and the promise of choices that could define the rest of her career. The day had begun with radar contacts and emergency landings. It was ending with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Behind them, Ghost's P-51 Mustang sat on the flight line like a bridge between past and future. its aluminum skin reflecting starlight, while maintenance crews worked to understand how vintage engineering had delivered its pilot safely home against impossible odds. The investigation into Colonel Ghost Hartwell's emergency landing officially concluded 72 hours later with findings that satisfied regulatory requirements while revealing nothing about the true nature of her mission. Connecting rod-bearing failure, mechanical within acceptable parameters for vintage aircraft, pilot performance exemplary under emergency conditions. The report would be filed with dozens of similar incidents and forgotten by everyone except those who understood that some stories contained layers invisible to routine scrutiny. Major Catherine Thorne spent those 3 days processing conversations that had fundamentally altered her understanding of military aviation and her place within its complex hierarchy. Ghost's offer hung in her mind like a challenge, an invitation to step outside conventional career paths and into something that promised both extraordinary opportunity and complete uncertainty. On Thursday morning, she found an envelope on her desk bearing no postmark or return address. Inside, coordinates to a location 50 miles south of Nellie's, a date and time, and instructions written in the careful handwriting of someone accustomed to maintaining operational security. If interested in advanced flight evaluation, present yourself at designated coordinates. Bring overnight gear. Tell no one. The coordinates led to a private airstrip carved into desert floor that appeared on no charts and existed in no official databases. Viper arrived at the specified time to find Ghost waiting beside a sleek aircraft that belonged in no museum or service manual she'd ever seen. The machine looked like what might happen if alien technology mated with human engineering. Curves that suggested supersonic capability, surfaces that seemed to bend light around them, engines that whispered rather than roared. "What the hell is that?" Viper asked, her trained eye trying to process aerodynamic features that violated several laws of physics. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's what happens when unlimited research budgets meet pilots crazy enough to test theories that should remain theoretical. Ghost ran her hand along the aircraft's impossible curves with obvious affection. "And you want me to fly it?" "I want to see if you can fly it. There's a difference." The pre-flight briefing took place in a hangar that contained aircraft spanning 7 decades of aviation development. P-51 Mustangs shared space with jets that looked like they'd been designed by committees of mad scientists. Each machine represented pushing boundaries that conventional wisdom declared impossible to push. The aircraft you'll be evaluating has flight characteristics that will challenge everything you think you know about aerodynamics. Control responses happen faster than conscious thought. G-forces that would kill normal pilots feel like gentle turns. The machine thinks at quantum speeds and expects its pilot to keep up. Ghost handed her a flight suit made from materials that felt like liquid mercury given form. "This isn't about stick and rudder skills. This is about whether your mind can process information quickly enough to partner with technology that operates beyond human limitations." Viper suited up with the careful attention to detail that marked someone who understood that survival often depended on proper preparation. The helmet contained displays that painted three-dimensional information directly onto her retinas. The seat adjusted itself to her body measurements with mechanical precision that suggested artificial intelligence involvement. "Remember," Ghost said as the canopy lowered, "the aircraft wants to fly. Your job is to think fast enough to give it direction." The first touch of power sent Viper's consciousness into realms she'd never imagined. The machine didn't just respond to control inputs. It anticipated them, interpreted pilot intention, and executed maneuvers that existed in the space between thought and action. Rolling inverted at 500 knots felt like breathing. Vertical climbs that should have compressed her spine into powder felt like gentle acceleration. For 45 minutes, She danced with physics in ways that redefined her understanding of what flight could become when human skill partnered with technology that transcended current engineering limitations. The aircraft taught her that everything she'd learned about flying was merely preparation for this moment, when pure capability met unlimited possibility. Landing brought her back to Earth both literally and figuratively. As the canopy rose, Viper found herself struggling to process experiences that had no reference points in conventional aviation. She'd just flown faster, higher, and more precisely than any pilot in recorded history, yet felt like she was only beginning to understand what the aircraft could actually do. Ghost waited on the tarmac, studying her face with the attention of someone reading exam results that would determine futures. "How do you feel?" "Like I just discovered I've been walking when I could have been running all along." "Good answer. That aircraft responds to pilots who understand that current limitations exist mainly in our imagination. You passed the first evaluation." "There are more." "Many more. This was just to determine if you could think fast enough to survive advanced training. The real tests evaluate whether you can make decisions at speeds that leave no room for doubt, hesitation, or fear." Viper climbed down from the most remarkable aircraft she'd ever flown, her mind racing with implications. If this technology existed, if pilots were being trained to operate at these levels, then everything she'd understood about military aviation was decades behind reality. Who builds these machines? Who funds this program? What's the operational purpose? Ghost smiled. "Those are questions with answers that require security clearances I can't provide. But I can tell you that exceptional pilots have opportunities that exist outside normal military career tracks. Opportunities that make conventional advancement look like elementary school exercises." The desert sun was setting as they secured the mysterious aircraft in its hangar home. Tomorrow would bring Viper back to Nellie's, back to administrative duties and training schedules that now seemed quaint by comparison. But tonight had opened doors to possibilities that would forever change how she viewed her potential as an aviator and her value as a military professional. 3 weeks later, Major Catherine Thorne received orders transferring her to a classified facility whose location appeared on no maps and whose mission remained undefined in all official documentation. Colonel Reeves signed her transfer papers with obvious reluctance, recognizing that he was losing one of his most capable officers to operations that existed beyond his security clearance. "It's been an honor serving with you, Major. Whatever you're being tasked with, I have complete confidence in your ability to excel." Viper packed her belongings with the methodical care of someone who understood that this transfer represented more than changing duty assignments. She was stepping away from conventional military career progression and into something that promised extraordinary challenges balanced against complete uncertainty about outcomes. The farewell gathering at the Officers Club brought together pilots and support personnel who'd worked with her during her time at Nellie's. Captain Rodriguez and Captain Chen presented her with a plaque commemorating her role in the Ghost incident, though none of them understood the full significance of that morning's events. To Major Thorne, Rodriguez raised his beer in salute, who taught us that sometimes the most important intelligence comes from recognizing patterns that others miss. The toast was echoed throughout the room by aviators who respected professional competence, regardless of rank or gender. Viper looked around at faces that represented the best of military aviation, dedicated professionals who served their country with skill and honor, even when that service went unrecognized by those who made policy decisions from behind desks. "Thank you all," she responded, "for the opportunity to serve alongside the finest aviators in the world, and for demonstrating that excellence recognizes excellence regardless of packaging." Her final night at Nellie's passed quietly, spent walking the flight line among aircraft that had become as familiar as old friends. F-22 Raptors, F-16 Fighting Falcons, training aircraft that had carried generations of pilots through the transformation from ground-bound humans to masters of three-dimensional combat. Each machine represented dreams realized, challenges overcome, limitations transcended through human determination and engineering brilliance. But now she was leaving this familiar world for something that promised to redefine her understanding of what aviation could become when freed from conventional constraints. Ghost's P-51 had been just the beginning, a demonstration that exceptional pilots could find ways to serve at levels that official channels never acknowledged. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, painting the mountains in shades of gold and copper, Major Catherine Thorne drove away from Nellis Air Force Base toward coordinates that would take her into the most classified aviation program in American military history. Behind her, the base came alive with morning flight operations, pilots and aircraft beginning another day of training, testing, and preparation for missions that might never come. Ahead lay possibilities that challenged everything she thought she knew about the boundaries of human flight, and the opportunities available to those willing to push beyond comfort zones into realms where ordinary pilots feared to venture. The road stretched toward mountains that concealed facilities where the future of aviation was being written by pilots whose names would never appear in official records, but whose contributions would define air superiority for generations. Colonel Ghost Hartwell had offered her a choice between safety and excellence, between conventional success and extraordinary service. As Nevada desert rolled past her windshield, Viper knew she'd made the right decision. The classified facility emerged from desert landscape like a mirage that refused to fade upon closer inspection. Buildings that seemed to grow from the earth itself, painted in colors that made them nearly invisible against their surroundings. Security procedures that rivaled those protecting nuclear weapons. Personnel who moved with the purposeful efficiency of people, engaged in work that couldn't be discussed with anyone lacking appropriate clearances. Major Thorne's sponsor for entry into this shadow world turned out to be someone she'd never expected to see again. Colonel Ghost Hartwell waited at the main gate, now wearing a uniform bearing no rank insignia or unit designations, her appearance transformed by the confident bearing of someone operating at the highest levels of military authority. "Welcome to what we informally call the Experimental Test Pilot School for Impossible Things," Ghost said as they processed through security checkpoints that scanned everything from retinal patterns to genetic markers. "Your real education in military aviation is about to begin." The briefing room contained pilots whose faces Viper recognized from aviation magazines and military histories. Test pilots who'd pushed experimental aircraft beyond their design limitations. Combat veterans who'd survived missions that existed only in classified files. Aviators whose skills had earned them access to programs that officially didn't exist. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ghost addressed the assembled pilots, "Major Thorne joins our evaluation program based on demonstrated competence under extraordinary circumstances. Her background includes combat experience, advanced pilot training, and the intellectual flexibility necessary for operating aircraft that challenge conventional understanding of aerodynamic principles." The orientation process consumed 3 days of technical briefings, psychological evaluations, and practical examinations that tested everything from spatial reasoning to decision-making under extreme stress. Viper found herself among pilots whose capabilities exceeded anything she'd encountered in conventional military service, yet who treated her as an equal based solely on flying performance rather than gender or traditional career progression. "The aircraft you'll be evaluating," explained Dr. Rebecca Santos, the program's chief engineer, represent the convergence of multiple classified research programs. Propulsion systems that manipulate electromagnetic fields, flight control computers that process information at quantum speeds, materials that change their properties based on pilot commands. The hangar tour revealed machines that belonged in science fiction rather than military reality. aircraft with wings that could alter their shape during flight, engines that produced thrust without burning fossil fuels, flight decks that interface directly with pilot neural patterns to create seamless integration between human intention and machine response. Each aircraft requires pilots capable of processing information and making decisions at speeds that exceed normal human cognitive limitations, Dr. Santos continued. We're not just testing machines, we're exploring the upper boundaries of human-machine integration. Viper studied the impossible aircraft with growing excitement and apprehension. These machines represented everything she dreamed aviation could become, but also challenges that might exceed even her considerable abilities. How many pilots successfully complete the program? She asked. Historically, about 15%. The attrition rate isn't due to lack of courage or basic flying skills. It's because most pilots reach cognitive saturation when required to process information at the speeds these aircraft demand. That evening, Viper sat in her assigned quarters reviewing technical manuals that read like advanced physics textbooks. The aircraft she'd be flying operated according to principles that barely existed in theoretical literature, much less practical application. Success would require not just mastering new flight characteristics, but fundamentally reorganizing her understanding of how aircraft and pilots could work together. Outside her window, the desert stretched toward mountains that concealed the most advanced aviation research facility in human history. Tomorrow would begin training that would either expand her capabilities beyond anything she'd imagined possible, or prove that some boundaries couldn't be crossed regardless of determination and skill. Either way, she was exactly where she belonged, at the cutting edge of human flight, surrounded by people who understood that the word impossible was just a starting point for serious engineering challenges. Flight training began at 500 hours with aircraft that appeared conventional, until closer inspection revealed details that violated everything Viper thought she knew about aerodynamics. Control surfaces that moved with liquid smoothness, engines that produced thrust patterns that seemed to ignore Newton's laws, cockpits that felt more like neural interface chambers than traditional flight decks. Today we start with basic familiarity flights, announced Captain Torres, her primary instructor. These aircraft respond to pilot intentions as much as control inputs. Mental clarity becomes as important as stick and rudder skills. The morning briefing covered emergency procedures that sounded like science fiction. Ejection seats that could deliver pilots safely to ground from altitudes exceeding 100,000 feet. Life support systems that functioned in environments ranging from deep ocean to near space. Communication equipment that worked regardless of electromagnetic interference or distance from ground stations. The most important thing to remember, Torres emphasized, is that these aircraft want to push boundaries. Your job is to think fast enough to provide intelligent direction while they're rewriting physics textbooks. Viper's first flight lasted exactly 18 minutes and covered more than 800 miles of Nevada airspace. The aircraft accelerated, climbed, and maneuvered with performance characteristics that made her previous flying experience seem like learning to walk. Every control input produced responses that happened faster than conscious thought, requiring anticipation and planning several seconds ahead of actual aircraft behavior. How did it feel? Torres asked as she climbed down from the most remarkable machine she'd ever flown. Like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra while riding a rocket, Viper struggled to find words for experiences that had no precedent in conventional aviation. Good description. Most pilots describe their first flights in terms that suggest religious experiences or controlled hallucinations. The fact that you're thinking in terms of coordination and timing suggests you might survive the advanced training. The debriefing session revealed that her 18-minute flight had been monitored by sensors that tracked everything from her neural activity to microscopic changes in muscle tension. The data would be analyzed by teams of specialists who understood human-machine interface at levels that bordered on telepathic communication. Your cognitive processing rates are exceptional, Dr. Santos explained, reviewing telemetry displays that looked more like medical charts than flight data. Most pilots experience information overload during their first exposure to advanced flight characteristics. You seem to be processing and adapting in real time. Week 2 introduced aircraft that operated in environments where normal planes would disintegrate. Flights at altitudes where the sky turned black and Earth's curvature became visible. Speeds that compressed time and distance into mathematical concepts rather than physical realities. Maneuvers that generated G-forces that should have been lethal but felt like gentle acceleration. You're adapting faster than anyone we've seen in 5 years, Ghost observed during her weekly evaluation. The question now becomes whether you can maintain performance standards when we introduce combat scenarios. Combat training took place in airspace that existed on no civilian maps, against opponents flying aircraft that officially didn't exist. Electronic warfare environments where normal instruments failed and pilots navigated by intuition and dead reckoning. Scenarios that required making life-or-death decisions at speeds that left no time for conscious analysis. Viper found herself excelling in situations that had ended other pilots' participation in the program. Her combat experience, combined with natural ability to process information quickly, allowed her to operate these impossible aircraft in conditions that would have been suicidal in conventional fighters. You're not just flying these machines, Torres observed after a particularly demanding training session. You're partnering with them. That's the difference between surviving advanced training and washing out. By month 3, she was flying operational missions that would remain classified long after she retired. Deep reconnaissance flights over territories where international incidents could trigger global conflicts. Test missions evaluating aircraft capabilities under conditions that existed nowhere on Earth, except in the imaginations of engineers who specialized in making impossible things possible. Each mission reinforced her understanding that she'd found her true calling in aviation that existed beyond conventional military structure. Here, performance mattered more than politics, results counted more than rank, and exceptional pilots were valued for their abilities rather than evaluated according to demographic categories. You've exceeded every performance benchmark we have, Ghost informed her during their final evaluation meeting. The question now is whether you're ready for permanent assignment to operational status. Viper looked out at the flight line, where aircraft that redefined human flight capability sat ready for missions that would challenge everything she'd learned about serving her country. The choice was clear: return to conventional military aviation with its limitations and frustrations, or step permanently into a world where the only boundaries were those imposed by imagination and courage. "I'm ready," she said, knowing that this decision would define the rest of her career and possibly her life. The oath ceremony took place in a room that contained no flags, unit designations, or formal military decorations. Just pilots whose names would never appear in official records, swearing to serve their country in operations that would remain classified for generations. Major Catherine Thorne raised her right hand and repeated words that committed her to excellence in aviation that existed beyond normal human limitations. As she spoke the ancient promises of military service, she understood that she'd finally found where exceptional aviators went when conventional career paths couldn't contain their capabilities. The advanced training program concluded 6 months after it began, with Viper qualifying as mission-ready in aircraft that represented the cutting edge of classified aviation technology. Her final evaluation placed her among the top 5% of pilots who'd attempted the program, earning her assignment to operational squadrons that flew missions existing in the gap between possible and impossible. Colonel Ghost Hartwell presided over the small graduation ceremony, addressing 12 pilots who'd survived training that had begun with 43 candidates. The attrition rate reflected not inadequate preparation, but the extraordinary demands of operating aircraft that pushed human cognitive abilities to their theoretical limits. "You represent the finest military aviators in the world," Ghost told the assembled graduates. "Your skills will be tested in environments that exist nowhere else, flying missions that matter at levels most people never imagine. The responsibility is enormous. The satisfaction is beyond description." Viper received her assignment to Squadron X7, a unit that officially didn't exist but whose missions influenced global security at levels that never appeared in news reports. Her new call sign, selected by squadron members based on her demonstrated abilities, was Quantum, recognition of her capacity to process information and make decisions at speeds that seemed to violate normal time constraints. The assignment came with quarters that were comfortable but austere, security clearances that opened doors she'd never known existed, and the understanding that her flying career had finally reached the level where her capabilities could be fully utilized without institutional constraints. Her first operational mission launched 3 weeks later from a runway that existed on no charts, flying an aircraft whose designation was known only to the dozen pilots certified to operate it. The target was a reconnaissance flight over territory where international law meant nothing and discovery could trigger conflicts involving nuclear powers. Quantum flight, you have green light for mission execution. Weather clear, no known hostile activity in target area. Flight time approximately 4 hours with 2 refueling stops over international waters. The aircraft lifted off desert runway with the whisper-quiet efficiency that marked advanced propulsion systems. Within minutes, Viper was flying faster and higher than 99.9% of human pilots had ever flown, heading toward objectives that would provide intelligence crucial to national security decisions made at the highest levels of government. As Earth fell away below her, revealing the curve of the planet against star-filled space, she understood that every frustration, every barrier, every moment of institutional prejudice had been preparation for this opportunity to serve her country at the absolute pinnacle of military aviation. The mission proceeded flawlessly, demonstrating that her training had prepared her for operational realities that exceeded even the demanding scenarios of the evaluation program. 6 hours later, she returned to base with intelligence that would influence policy decisions at levels requiring presidential authorization. "Outstanding work, Quantum," Ghost greeted her upon landing. "Your mission data will reach decision makers within 2 hours. How do you feel about operational flying?" "Like I've finally found where I belong in military aviation." "Good answer. Because you have approximately 6 months to prepare for advanced training that will qualify you for missions we can't even discuss at your current security level." Viper looked out at aircraft that represented the absolute cutting edge of classified aviation technology, understanding that her journey toward the highest levels of military flying was just beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she'd proven that exceptional aviators could find opportunities that transcended conventional limitations when they were willing to push beyond comfort zones into realms where extraordinary service became possible. The months that followed established Major Catherine Quantum Thorne as one of the most capable pilots in the most classified aviation program in American military history. Her mission success rate exceeded unit averages. Her technical proficiency earned recognition from engineers who'd spent careers developing impossible aircraft, and her leadership qualities made her a natural choice for training new pilots attempting to qualify for operational status. Squadron X7 operations took her to every continent and several locations that didn't officially exist on any maps. Deep ocean reconnaissance flights from aircraft carriers whose names were classified. High-altitude missions over polar regions where instrument failures meant death and navigation required dead reckoning skills most modern pilots had never developed. combat air patrols in international airspace, where rules of engagement were written by people whose names appeared on no organizational charts. Each mission reinforced her understanding that she discovered aviation's highest expression. Flying that combined cutting-edge technology with pilot skills, pushed to their theoretical limits in service of objectives that influenced global security without public recognition or political acknowledgement. Your performance has been exemplary, Colonel Ghost Hartwell observed during Quantum's annual evaluation. Squadron leadership is recommending you for advancement to the Advanced Technology Evaluation Program. The advanced program represented another level entirely, aircraft that existed at the intersection of classified research and engineering theories that challenged fundamental understanding of physics. Pilots who'd proven themselves in operational squadrons competed for opportunities to evaluate machines that wouldn't enter operational service for decades, if ever. What does advanced evaluation involve? Quantum asked. Flying aircraft that exist primarily in the imagination of engineers who specialize in making impossible things work. The attrition rate approaches 90%, not because pilots lack courage, but because the cognitive demands exceed human limitations. The briefing for advanced evaluation took place in facilities that made the original classified hangar look like a conventional Air Force base. Security procedures that required genetic verification. Aircraft that were stored in underground complexes that resembled science fiction more than military reality. Engineers whose credentials included advanced degrees in subjects that didn't exist in public universities. The aircraft you'll be evaluating, explained Dr. Elena Vasquez, the program's chief scientist, represent convergence points between multiple classified research programs. Propulsion systems that manipulate spacetime geometry. Flight control systems that process information using quantum computational principles. Navigation equipment that operates independent of Earth-based reference points. The implications were staggering. These weren't just advanced aircraft. They were vehicles that operated according to physical principles that existed primarily in theoretical physics journals, and the imaginations of scientists who specialized in turning impossibilities into engineering challenges. Quantum's first advanced evaluation flight lasted 6 hours and covered distances that should have required intercontinental ballistic missile technology. The aircraft moved through space using principles that made conventional jet propulsion look like steam engines, responded to pilot commands at speeds that required thinking several seconds ahead of actual flight conditions, and generated performance data that would remain classified for decades. How was it? Dr. Vasquez asked as Quantum completed post-flight medical evaluation. Like partnering with technology that thinks faster than I do, but still needs human judgment to provide direction and purpose. Excellent response. Most pilots describe their first advanced evaluation flights in terms that suggest psychological break from reality. Your ability to maintain analytical perspective while operating beyond normal cognitive limits suggests exceptional adaptability. The Advanced Evaluation Program consumed 18 months of training that pushed human-machine integration to levels that bordered on science fiction. Quantum found herself flying missions that existed in the gap between current technology and theoretical possibilities, evaluating aircraft that wouldn't be fully understood until engineering capabilities caught up with the physics they employed. Her success in the advanced program earned her assignment as a test pilot for projects that existed decades ahead of anything that would ever be acknowledged in public military forums. Aircraft that could travel between continents in minutes rather than hours. Missions that took place in environments ranging from deep ocean, trenches to the edge of space itself. You've achieved something that less than 1% of military pilots ever approach, Ghost observed during their final evaluation meeting. The question now is whether you're ready for assignment to the theoretical research program. Quantum understood that each level of classification had represented progressively more extraordinary opportunities, balanced against complete separation from conventional military career advancement. The theoretical research program would take her even further from normal military structure into realms where aviation met pure scientific research. What does theoretical research involve? Flying aircraft that challenge our understanding of what flight means when freed from conventional limitations. Missions that exist primarily to determine what becomes possible when human consciousness interfaces directly with technology that operates beyond current scientific understanding. The choice represented the ultimate expression of her commitment to military aviation at its highest levels. She could remain in advanced evaluation, flying missions that already exceeded anything publicly acknowledged, or step into research that would redefine human flight for generations yet to come. Looking out at aircraft that represented the absolute cutting edge of classified technology, Quantum made the decision that would define the final phase of her extraordinary military career. I'm ready for theoretical research assignment. The theoretical research program operated from facilities that challenged every assumption about military aviation and its relationship to scientific discovery. Underground complexes that extended for miles beneath Nevada desert, aircraft that existed primarily as mathematical concepts given physical form through engineering that wouldn't be understood for decades. Pilots whose responsibilities included not just flying, but contributing to fundamental research into human consciousness and its potential for integration with technology that operated beyond current scientific paradigms. Major Catherine Quantum Thorne found herself assigned to Project Looking Glass, a research initiative that explored the boundaries between human cognitive capability and machine intelligence operating at quantum computational speeds. Her role involved more than test piloting. She was participating in research that would influence human technological development for centuries. Your assignment, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the project's lead researcher, involves evaluating aircraft that respond to pilot consciousness rather than traditional control inputs. We're exploring whether human awareness can interface directly with quantum computational systems to achieve flight characteristics that exist beyond current aerodynamic understanding. The aircraft designated LG-7 resembled no machine Quantum had ever seen. Its surfaces seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury given form. The cockpit contained no traditional instruments, just interfaces that resembled jewelry more than flight controls. The entire machine felt alive in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundary between technology and consciousness. The aircraft responds to mental commands translated through quantum field interfaces, Dr. Chen explained during pre-flight briefing. Your thoughts become flight instructions. Your intentions determine aircraft behavior. Traditional stick and rudder skills become irrelevant. Quantum's first flight in LG-7 lasted exactly 12 minutes and redefined her understanding of what flight could become when human consciousness partnered directly with technology that operated beyond current scientific limitations. The aircraft didn't just respond to her commands. It anticipated them, interpreted her intentions, and executed maneuvers that existed in the space between thought and action. How do you feel? Dr. Chen asked as post-flight medical evaluation revealed brain activity patterns that had never been recorded in human subjects. Like I just discovered that everything I thought I knew about flying was preparation for learning how to think aircraft into motion. The research program consumed 4 years of Quantum's career, during which she flew missions that would remain classified long after theoretical physics caught up with the engineering principles they employed. Each flight generated data that advanced human understanding of consciousness, technology integration, and the potential for transcending limitations that had defined aviation since the Wright brothers first left the ground. Her contributions to theoretical research earned recognition from scientists whose work influenced global technology development at levels that never appeared in public forums. Papers bearing her name were published in classified journals that wouldn't be declassified for generations. Her insights into human-machine consciousness integration became foundational documents for research programs that would shape technological development well into the next century. Your work has exceeded every expectation we had when you entered the program, Dr. Chen observed during Quantum's final research evaluation. The question now is whether you're ready for transition to the Legacy Assignment Program. The Legacy Program represented the final phase of careers like Quantum's, opportunities for exceptional pilots to influence the development of future aviation programs, while mentoring the next generation of aviators capable of operating at the highest levels of classified military technology. What does Legacy Assignment involve? Quantum asked. Teaching, research, ensuring that the knowledge and experience you've accumulated over your extraordinary career gets passed to pilots who will continue pushing boundaries that most people never know exist. Quantum understood that accepting Legacy Assignment meant stepping back from operational flying into roles that would influence military aviation for decades through the pilots she trained and the programs she helped develop. It was transition from participant to architect, from operator to creator of opportunities for future aviators. The choice felt natural. After 27 years of military aviation that had taken her from conventional fighter jets to aircraft that operated beyond current scientific understanding, she was ready to help ensure that exceptional pilots would continue finding opportunities to serve their country at levels that transcended institutional limitations. "I accept Legacy Assignment," she said, understanding that this decision marked not the end of her aviation career, but its transformation into something that would influence military flying long after she retired. Colonel Catherine Quantum Thorne's Legacy Assignment began with responsibilities that spanned multiple classified aviation programs and several facilities that existed in the gap between current military capability and theoretical possibility. Her title, Director of Advanced Pilot Development, encompassed training, research, and strategic planning for aviation programs that wouldn't be acknowledged publicly for decades. Her first major initiative involved developing selection criteria for pilots capable of operating aircraft that challenged fundamental assumptions about human cognitive limitations. The traditional measures, reflexes, spatial reasoning, stress tolerance, proved inadequate for evaluating candidates who would interface directly with technology that operated at quantum computational speeds. "We need assessment methods that identify pilots capable of thinking beyond current limitations," she explained to a Joint Services Committee tasked with improving recruitment for classified programs. The aircraft we're developing require consciousness integration rather than manual control skills. The presentation generated classified research initiatives that would influence military pilot selection for generations. Quantum's insights into the relationship between human awareness and advanced technology became foundational documents for programs designed to identify and develop aviators capable of operating at the intersection of consciousness and quantum computational systems. Her mentoring responsibilities brought her into contact with pilots whose capabilities exceeded anything she'd encountered during her own operational career. Captain Maria Santos, whose spatial reasoning abilities allowed her to navigate in environments where traditional instruments failed completely. Major James Wright, whose reaction times approached the theoretical limits of human neural processing. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, whose intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics made her a natural choice for consciousness interface aircraft evaluation. The pilots entering advanced programs today represent capabilities that exceed what we thought possible when I began this career, Quantum observed during her quarterly briefing to program leadership. They're not just better trained than previous generations, They're cognitively different in ways that suggest human adaptation to technological environments that didn't exist 20 years ago. This observation led to research collaborations with neuroscientists, cognitive psychologists, and consciousness researchers, whose work explored the boundaries between human awareness and artificial intelligence. Quantum found herself contributing to scientific papers that examine how human consciousness could integrate with quantum computational systems to achieve performance characteristics that transcended traditional limitations. Her teaching assignments included developing curriculum for pilots who would operate aircraft existing decades ahead of anything publicly acknowledged. The challenges involved not just technical training, but preparing human consciousness for interface with technology that operated beyond current scientific understanding. Flying advanced aircraft requires more than technical skill, she told classes of pilots selected for evaluation programs that had rejection rates exceeding 90%. It requires willingness to expand your definition of what's possible when human awareness partners with technology that thinks at quantum speeds. The classified research facilities under her oversight developed aircraft that would influence global technology development for centuries. Propulsion systems that manipulated spacetime geometry, navigation equipment that operated independent of Earth-based reference systems, flight control interfaces that responded to pilot consciousness rather than manual inputs. Each project reinforced her understanding that military aviation had evolved beyond traditional concepts of flying into something that resembled applied consciousness research as much as aeronautical engineering. The pilots she trained weren't just operating advanced aircraft. They were participating in the evolution of human technological capability. Your work has fundamentally altered our understanding of human potential in technological environments, Dr. Elena Vasquez observed during Quantum's 5th year in legacy assignment. The programs you've developed will influence aviation for generations. Quantum looked out at facilities that contained aircraft representing the absolute cutting edge of classified technology, understanding that her career had evolved from participant to architect of opportunities that would define military aviation well into the next century. At 54, with 31 years of military service that had taken her from conventional fighter jets to aircraft that operated beyond current scientific paradigms, she'd finally found her true calling, ensuring that exceptional aviators would continue finding opportunities to serve their country at levels that transcended every institutional limitation. The transformation was complete. The pilot who'd once been relegated to administrative duties due to institutional prejudice had become the architect of aviation programs that would influence human technological development for centuries. The final chapter of Colonel Catherine, Quantum, Thorne's active military career, began with a request that challenged everything she thought she understood about the scope of classified aviation programs. A Joint Services Committee, operating at security levels that required presidential authorization, asked her to evaluate the feasibility of training programs for missions that would take human pilots beyond Earth's atmosphere into environments where traditional concepts of flight became irrelevant. The next generation of classified aircraft will operate in spacetime environments that barely exist in theoretical physics, explained General Patricia Morrison, whose 3-star rank concealed responsibilities that spanned multiple agencies and several programs that officially didn't exist. We need pilots capable of consciousness interface with technology that operates independent of planetary reference systems. The implications were staggering. Quantum was being asked to design training programs for aviators who would operate beyond Earth itself, flying missions in environments where traditional aerodynamics meant nothing and success required integration with technology that challenged fundamental understanding of physical reality. "What's the operational timeframe for these missions?" Quantum asked. "Classified, but assume that pilots graduating from programs you develop will be flying operational missions within 5 years. The research phase consumed 18 months of collaboration with scientists whose work existed at the intersection of consciousness studies, quantum physics, and theoretical engineering. The resulting training protocols represented the most advanced pilot development program in human history, designed to prepare human consciousness for interface with technology that operated beyond current scientific paradigms. The first class of candidates included pilots selected from every branch of military service based on cognitive capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. Captain Alina Rodriguez, whose spatial reasoning abilities allowed her to navigate in 11-dimensional mathematical spaces. Major David Chen, whose consciousness could process quantum computational data streams in real time. Lieutenant Amy Johnson, whose intuitive understanding of spacetime geometry made her a natural candidate for missions that would take place beyond Earth's gravitational influence. You represent the finest military aviators in human history, Quantum told the assembled candidates during their initial briefing. Your training will prepare you for missions that exist beyond current human experience, flying aircraft that operate according to principles that barely exist in theoretical physics. The training program challenged every assumption about human cognitive limitations and the potential for consciousness integration with quantum computational systems. Pilots learned to navigate using mathematical concepts rather than visual references, to control aircraft through direct mental interface rather than physical manipulation of controls, to operate in environments where traditional concepts of up, down, and forward became irrelevant. Quantum found herself teaching principles that didn't exist in any textbook, developing training methods for capabilities that had never been tested in human subjects. Each class generated research data that advanced understanding of human potential when integrated with technology operating beyond current scientific limitations. Your work has exceeded every expectation we had, General Morrison observed during the program's third-year evaluation. The pilots you're training represent capabilities that didn't exist in human consciousness 5 years ago. The success of the training program led to Quantum's final assignment, establishing the framework for military aviation programs that would operate for decades beyond her own career. Her responsibility involved not just developing current capabilities, but creating institutional structure that,